Exposing an autistic child to loud noises or other sensory challenges in order for them to get used to it is not only cruel, but it's doomed to failure. Sensory dysfunction is a physiological issue and it can't be dealt with through behavioural strategies. Now, if you're thinking, well, it worked for me, okay, but at what cost? You certainly haven't cured them. That's not scientifically possible. What you may have done is force them to suppress their feelings and their discomfort, which long term could have very serious physical and mental health consequences. So, what is sensory processing disorder? It's basically the way that our body regulates the senses. Now, we all have senses and we all process them. And for most of us, that is a fairly easy thing for us to do. But for some people, they simply can't do that. Their senses can't regulate. Now, this occurs very commonly in autistic children, and it's strongly associated with that, but it's not the only group of children who may struggle with sensory processing difficulties. It's very common in children who've experienced early years trauma, including medical trauma. For example, premature babies, that they've noticed it's occurred in them quite a lot. And it can even occur in children who've had a C-section birth instead of a vaginal birth. They have noticed a small difference in the way that those children process their sensory experiences. So it affects all our senses. The one you most commonly probably have heard of is hearing, having very sensitive hearing. But it also affects our visual sense, it affects touch. You may notice your child is very sensitive to clothes, and it affects vestibular, which is movement, and proprioception, which is the way that our joints and muscles talk to each other. So you can either be hypersensitive, such as being sensitive to noise and touch, or you can be under-responsive, and you may see that with a child who's always on the move. That might be a vestibular unresponsive child, or a child who's always climbing and jumping and swinging. That could be a child who's unresponsive in their vestibular sense. So sensory processing disorder can have a massive impact on a child's life, but the way we deal with it is really important. So I saw a child's EHCP the other day, and this child has sensitive hearing and it was freaking out every time a bell went off, for example, the fire alarm or just the bell to change lessons. And in his plan, it said increase exposure to the sound of the bell so that he gets more used to it. Now, I said to the parent, get them to take that out. That's not going to work for him. You can't get these children used to it. They just have to accept that's who he is. He has sensitive hearing. Having said that, we don't have to do nothing. So my daughter has sensory processing difficulties, and the reason I decided to do something was because of the huge impact it was having on her life. I mean, we couldn't go to shops, we couldn't go to restaurants, she couldn't attend her friends' birthday parties, and very significantly, she was struggling in school. Now, the good news is there is a kind and gentle approach to dealing with sensory processing difficulties. It's called sensory integration therapy, and it would usually be delivered by an OT, that's an occupational therapist. So if your child is struggling, if you notice that they're sensitive to noises or sensitive to clothes, or they're constantly moving, or when they are oversensitive to movement and maybe getting really stressed out even in the backseat of a car, then you may want to explore this. Ask for a referral through the NHS to the occupational therapy team. Now, a few words of warning. First of all, the waiting lists are long. There's no getting around it. If you ask for a referral, you're going to be waiting for a long time. The other thing is that they may not deliver sensory integration therapy. There's a bit of sniffiness about this therapy because there isn't peer-reviewed evidence for its success. Now, I've spoken to some OTs about this and they accept that, but they say there is a lot of anecdotal evidence. And quite frankly, the NHS have a lot of services and treatments that they provide that there isn't peer-reviewed scientific evidence for. I mean, a good example of that is calorie-controlled diets. There's actually very little evidence that these work long-term, but, you know, show me a doctor who won't tell a fat person that they should go on a calorie-controlled diet. So why are they being so sniffy about this? So that's the problem with the NHS. So you might think, okay, maybe I should go private. And yes, that is a good strategy, but I understand not everyone has the money for private therapy. Now, if you have perhaps a little bit of money, what you could do is approach a private OT and say, could you do an assessment and write me a sensory diet for my child? So let me explain what a sensory diet is, because it's a terrible name because it's got very little to do with food. So what the OT would do is look at the different senses in your child and how they're functioning. And as I said before, they can be oversensitive or undersensitive. And so then they would come up with a strategy that you would do on a daily basis to help your child regulate that sense. So for example, if they were under-responsive in proprioception, they may suggest get a trampoline, get a swing, get a climbing rope, and do that every 90 minutes to 2 hours all day. They may say if they're sensitive to touch, there are various things that you can do that before getting dressed. They might recommend a warm shower or a massage. These kind of things can help reduce the impact and better regulate the sensory system. So it normally comes as a small document and it will tell you what to do every day, and this is basically your strategy for each day. It's enormously helpful. I had one for my daughter and we did that religiously every day for about 2 years and things got better. Now I can't explain exactly why, because she still has sensory processing disorder. She still has many struggles, but the things we couldn't do before, like going to restaurants and sitting in a classroom, she can do those. Now, one of the reasons for that, I think, is because sensory difficulties are attached to anxiety. So the higher your anxiety, the worse your sensory processing is going to be. So if you imagine, you know, if you're walking down a dark road late at night, there's no one else around, every tiny little snap of a twig or rustle of a bush, you'll go, that's because anxiety ups your sensory sensitivity. And so having this sensory diet in place meant that I was all the time lowering her anxiety, and so she was just generally better regulated. Now, as I said, it's not gone away completely. There are still things that she will never be able to do. I don't think she's ever going to be able to enjoy a fireworks display, and I don't know that she's ever going to be able to go to the cinema and sit for a film without getting up and running around and fidgeting and saying, I'm bored, I can't do this. So, you know, that we have the realities of the disorder that we will just always live with. But it has helped enormously, and this is why I really advocate for getting a sensory diet for your child to help regulate their sensory system. Now, if you just don't have any money for a therapist and you just can't find one anywhere, the good news is that I have some tips on how you can do it yourself at home, because so many of these things you can just do at home. So there are 3 basic steps which I'm going to run you through now, but if you want to have a one-to-one call with me to talk about it more thoroughly with your child, I'm going to put a link in the description on how you can get in touch with me and have a free 20-minute coaching session with me to work through some of these things. But for now, let's go through each of the steps. So the first thing that you need to do is analyse. So what is your child doing? Are they spinning? Are they twirling? Are they refusing to put on clothes? Are they covering their ears every time you put a hand dryer on? Observe them and notice the things that they do. One of the things that was really evident with my daughter from an incredibly early age was that she was constantly moving her feet, and she would bang them against the edge of a chair. And I remember someone saying, oh, she's going to be a dancer because she always loves moving. It's like, no, she's not going to be a dancer. She has sensory processing disorder. And that banging against the edge of the chair was her way of getting sensory input because she's under responsive. So it might be a little thing like that. Are they always climbing? I mean, I know all children climb, but is it a little bit obsessive with them? Are they constantly hanging upside down? That's another one you often see. A friend of mine we were in a playground together, and her daughter was constantly upside down, and I said, does she have sensory processing difficulties? And she went, yeah. I mean, I already knew that she was a neurodivergent child. So watch them, watch how they're moving, watch how they're touching things. That's another one, to constantly touching things. My daughter would do that. We'd be on the London Underground and she was constantly touching things. It's so dirty down there. We'd step out the tube and her hands would be black. So she has some under responsiveness in her touch. So she constantly is wanting to touch and feel things because she needs that input, because without that input, when you can't feel your body in space and time, it is incredibly anxiety inducing. So analyze. The next one is strategize. So how can you meet their need? If your child is constantly moving, find play equipment that they can move in. So my child has vestibular sensitivity, so that's movement. So I noticed that when she was a baby, she just wanted to be in the swings and the playground all the time. Like, just couldn't get her out of them. Every time I picked her up to take her out, she would just start screaming at me. So I got a swing at home. And then we decided to change it up a bit, and we got a hammock. And then I built in her under-responsive touch. The hammocks are great because they hold you physically. And so I would wrap the hammock right over her. And she also has visual sensitivity, so she would like to wrap the hammock right over her face. So we're dealing with three things there. We've got under-responsive vestibular, so I'm giving her movement in the hammock. We've got under-responsive touch, so the fabric of the hammock is holding her and helping to increase the sensitivity to touch. And then we've got visual oversensitivity, so she's pulling it over her face. So the strategy for us was every 90 minutes to 2 hours every day, she would go in the hammock, maybe just for 5-10 minutes. And I just noticed a real calming in her after that. So there are lots of other things that you can do. If your child is always jumping and climbing, get climbing ropes at home, get trampolines. If you can't put equipment up in your house, then you can do things like wheelbarrow races. That's causing a lot of pressure on the arms. That's giving you good proprioception. And there's obviously preventative things like earplugs or ear defenders for noise, sunglasses for bright light. There are lots of things that you can actually simply do at home to help regulate your child's system. The third stage of this is schedule. Now, as I said, for my daughter, her sensory processing difficulties were quite extreme. So we did every 90 minutes to 2 hours. I would say, right, let's do something. Let's get on the swing. Let's get on the trampoline. Let's do a wheelbarrow race. We used to play this game called the tortilla, where I would wrap her up in a blanket and you wrap them up really tightly, and then you go 1, 2, 3 and pull out the blanket and they spin off. Obviously do it on some mattresses and cushions so they don't hurt themselves. So we might, every 90 minutes or 2 hours, I'd say, right, let's do the burrito game. So you build it into your schedule. Now, I know what some of you are thinking, I don't have time to do this. So it can actually be part of your daily life and just built in with the things that you might usually do. So for example, you might get up in the morning and they would have a shower, and this is helping with tactile sensitivity. You may give them a breakfast that has lots of chewy foods. This helps with proprioception. Or give them a drink in a thick smoothie in a straw. Sucking also helps with regulating the sensory system. And then on their walk to school, you might encourage them to have some heavy books in their bags. This also helps with proprioception. And you can just play little games maybe before they go in the classroom. You might play a game where you put your hands together and just push against each other's hands. Again, that's great for proprioception. So you can build these things into their day. So it doesn't have to be a kind of like set exercise. It's like 2 o'clock, now we have to go and do 20 minutes trampolining. They can just be little things that you build into their day. And I know some of you are also going to be apprehensive about this because you have a demand avoidant child. And I get that. I have a demand avoidant child also. And at times it was really difficult to get her to do the things that I knew she needed to do to calm herself down. So I just say, keep on it. Avoid direct commands. Maybe say, oh, I fancy going on the trampoline, would you like to come with me? Or try to encourage things that you know that they like doing anyway. I mean, I'm going to be honest, to get my daughter moving, I would say, why don't we take your scooter? Scooters are great, by the way, there's loads of proprioception. Why don't we use your scooter and we'll go down to the shops and I'll buy you a packet of crisps? I mean, whatever, it was better than having a meltdown, you know? So any way that you can kind of encourage them, build it into their existing interests. For example, if they really like gaming and you can't get them away from the computer, maybe find a different type of seat, maybe one of those big round balls that they can sort of bounce on to get their body moving, so you can build it into the things that they already enjoy. This is a huge topic and I can't really do it justice in this short 10-minute video. And if you're feeling like this is too much, I can't do this all myself, I get it, and I'd like to help you with that. And that is why, as I said before, I am offering 20-minute free coaching call to help you develop your own sensory diet. Now, during that call, we will look through what you're noticing with your child and talk about some of the strategies that might help. And if you find that useful, you can then book further calls with me so we can implement it and see what's working at home and change it and adapt it to see what works for you. Now, obviously, I'm not an OT. I'm just someone who's been through this, and I want to try and help you. And obviously, if you can do this with an OT, absolutely you should do that. But if you are struggling to get through and get in touch with the OT, find someone to help you with this, I am there for you. So I'm going to put a link to how you can book a call with me, and even if you do that 20-minute call, 20-minute free call, if you decide after that I don't think this is working for me, you will still walk away with a strategy that will help you. So get in touch, because I'd really like to help you with this if you find that your child is struggling with sensory processing difficulties, and it would be great to talk. Sensory processing difficulties is a huge topic and it affects so many people. So I hope that video at least helped you understand it a little bit better and gave you some ideas on how you can support your child. There are of course so many other things that autistic and neurodivergent children struggle with. And I've got this video here which you might also like to watch to get some more ideas on helping your child have a happy and healthy life. Good luck.